Hey guys, thank you again for tuning in to Topic Tantrum. And you're probably asking yourself, what the fuck happened to Breaking the Ice? So I thought I would change the title a little bit. Breaking the Ice kind of sounded a little bit too generic, but I was coming up with a list of titles. Topic Tantrum seemed to stick out to me from all the other awful ones that I thought about. So I decided to change this and see if it sticks or not. Who knows, maybe in 2 weeks I'll probably have a different name. But you can always come back to the same place to find the podcast. And also while I'm here, because I apparently just showed up, I actually set up an email for this. So if you ever have any feedback or like any comments or anything that you want to say, feel free to send me an email. It's actually a Gmail account, so send it to topictantrum@gmail.com. So, you're probably wondering, what the fuck is he going to talk about this week? This week, I'm actually going to be talking about a couple different things. I'm actually going to be talking about the world chess champion, Magnus Carlsen, about his Netflix documentary, and a few other things that will probably just come to my head in the moment, since I rarely plan anything out. So, this week, I actually watched a documentary called Magnus. It's about the top chess player in the world, the number one guy. His name is Magnus Carlsen. He's a Norwegian guy, and he's actually a 26-year-old kid. The reason he's interesting and why they made a documentary, because he's considered a chess prodigy in the chess world. He was beating like world champions at the time when he was 12 or 13, where he was making draws or like winning. Essentially, if you can draw with a world champion or like someone who had been a world champion, like I believe Kasparov, that shows that you probably can be to their level or higher. But at like 12 or 13, he was already tying with these people or drawing with these people. And as he's gotten older, he essentially has only gotten better, which is why they consider him a prodigy. The documentary itself goes through his early life, like when he's growing up as a kid. He goes through and kind of shows what he does on his off time, how he wasn't necessarily into chess when he was very young. Like we're talking about 5-6 years old. His dad, I think, introduced it to him. But what happened is I think as the years went on, he slowly got a little bit more interested in it. Started reading up on chess books, chess strategy, etc. But the documentary shows his early life a little bit, and then they slowly lead back into how he won the World Chess Championships in 2013 when he first became the number one chess player in the world. So it's kind of like a lead up to that road. If you ever get a chance, go ahead and probably check it out. It is on Netflix. It's called Magnus. It's pretty interesting how he goes through his life. And when he's a young kid, he's really just like reading comics, playing soccer, like the things that normal kids do. The thing that kind of set him apart is that apparently his memory is insane. Like we're talking like where he can memorize thousands and thousands and thousands of things that are going on in his life or on the chessboard. It constantly shows him playing against 10 or 20 different people, I think. I don't think it was 20. I think it was 10 or 15 different people at Harvard. And essentially what he's doing, he's playing blindfolded, and he's not even looking at the boards of any of the people. And essentially what he's doing is he's just remembering where he's moving pieces. He has to remember, and he has to play out games. And he still beats people. I don't think he loses, either draws or beats them. And this is all like the top, apparently, people that play chess and so on. But 10 of them, blindfolded. I couldn't believe how good his memory is. I think with someone like that, I think they're just kind of born that way. I think it's something that, like, yes, you can get the right coach. Yeah, you can learn the right things or learn the right strategies and so on. But I think what it comes down to is sometimes like your mental capacity can just surpass so many other people. It's almost like being a freak in a way. they call it a prodigy, but in a way, it's almost like, you're not built like everyone else. How like certain athletes, maybe in tennis or boxing or MMA or whatever, sport, how they have this crazy ability. It's just that other people don't have. So even if, like, let's say a normal person were to get the same coach or something, they might be considered the best or close to the best in the world, but it's not quite the same thing as someone just who has, I guess, born like this. And it's just interesting as it goes through his life. Eventually what happens is, not like it's a spoiler, but essentially what happens is it shows his road leading up to the 2013 World Championships, where he's playing this Indian guy. I believe it's like Vishwanthan Anand or whatever. But he's all these reporters and like photographers and everything else just taking pictures. It's essentially like a celebrity thing. But it's interesting because they make them play in this glass box, where essentially the glass box is soundproof, but you can still see all these camera flashes and everything going on, like where people are kind of fighting outside and like pushing each other. And he has to tune all this out. Well, actually, both of them have to tune all this out while playing their game, while focusing on their game. And I just thought it was interesting. Also, another question that they ask to Magnus is, they ask him, how does your mind work, like when you're coming up with a chess move or something like that? And I think he says something to the effect of, I already kind of know what I'm going to do, or I have some type of intuition to what I'm going to do. I just spend the next 20 or 30 minutes checking to confirm that what I wanted to do originally is actually the best option. And I found that interesting because, like, for example, when I play chess, I will sit there and like think for whatever, like 30 minutes or so, or whatever amount of time. Usually I'm not playing someone's like waiting 30 minutes and like, what the fuck, dude, just move. But essentially when I'm playing chess, I think I'll look at the piece, I'll see all the options of where I could go. So like I'll go to, like, let's say I move the piece to so and so spot, then I'll spend the rest of the time trying to figure out, okay, so if I move it to this spot, what's gonna happen? Like, okay, is what are the next 3 or 4 moves that are gonna move or that are gonna happen? So, and I'll do that for, let's say, 3 or 4 different positions that I could move to. I don't think that's how normal people. I think that's how normal people play, but then when I guess you get to a certain level, you stop thinking about the moves and you start thinking about like strategies or tactics, essentially to the point where I think what it is that like over time you learn patterns. And it's not to say, oh, you can become great at chess just because you learn patterns, but apparently as the game goes on, there's only so many opening moves you can make. And as the game goes or progresses, essentially it becomes more open-ended, which is why by the very end, or what they call the end game, it's more like art than it is really memorizing patterns and stuff. Yes, you identify, oh, okay, I've seen this move before, or I recognize this game and I know what's going on. But it really comes down to, at the very end of the end game, I think it becomes this thing where you almost have to like work your art, which is, I guess, why they call Magnus, they nicknamed him the Mozart of chess. It's like everyone has the same pieces, but they can't quite create music like he can, for example. They compare him to like people like Bobby Fischer, which is another famous guy from the US, but I think he kind of went a little bit crazy. I think at some point he was like an anti-Semitic Jew, or he was an anti-Semitic about Jews or something. I remember talking about like in 2011 or something, he was making something about like how we caused 9/11 or some shit like that. But that's besides the point. That's going off topic. But essentially, so that's what the documentary shows. It essentially shows his road to the championships. But I suggest, if you are into chess a little bit or anything like that, it's still worth checking out. It's just interesting to see prodigies nowadays, because you feel like all the kids are like on Facebook, Twitter, checking on iPads, not really like, getting into some type of sport or something. At least as far as I know. So it's interesting to see like a modern day prodigy or something of that nature. But check it out. As for that, since I watched that, I've been getting into chess a little bit. I've always known chess my whole life. My dad used to play it because he's actually from the Soviet Union. So he kind of taught me and my sisters as we were growing up. For me, I was always a little bit into it, but I never actually took it seriously. Like, I only knew how to move the pieces, but I never learned any of the strategy or anything of that nature. I eventually bought a book named, I think it was like Fischer Teaches Chess. It's a very famous book. It's like, $5. You can go get it from the bookstore. But essentially what it is that it's teaching you puzzles, or it asks you, hey, how do you escape this move? Or how do you do this? But it's just pages and pages and pages full of chess moves, essentially. I just recently been going through it, and I figured, I don't know. I guess at some point in my life, I want to play a little bit of good chess, or at least beat my dad, or so on. Like at some point, I wanna get somewhat decent, coherent. It's like when people take up tennis. I've gotten pretty good at, but it's interesting to just kind of take on something when it's brand new. It's almost like that humble. You suck immediately at first, but it's like you can soak up so much when you're like a sponge. Essentially, you're brand new everything. You barely even know anything. You learn the rules, etc. But I found it just interesting that I think I want to try and play a little bit more. I think I want to try and maybe like download an app from like the App Store and so on. But I always thought maybe learn a little bit more strategies and so on. But what made me think about this is, when you learn something when you're a kid and when you learn something when you're an adult, it's two completely different things. For some reason, when you learn things as a kid, it almost like takes over your whole life. Like, for example, I learned tennis when I was a kid, and it's ingrained in my head. Like, I can just play. Even if I don't play for months and months and months and years and so on, it still is always ingrained into my head. So like when I go to a court or something, I might be rusty and hit a couple shots, but I still know the stroke or what I need to do in order to play tennis. Versus someone like, let's say you learn something when you're 20 or 30. Like, for example, I learned guitar when I was 21, I think. I can pick it up and play to a certain extent, but I'm only so good. Like, I only made it so far. And it's not to say that I can't keep learning, but I guess as you get older, time becomes more scarce. But I think learning as a kid and learning as an adult are two completely different things. I think when you learn something as a kid, it's almost like that becomes your skill when you get older. Versus, someone who learns, like, let's say guitar, it's almost like considered a little hobby, and you can only get so good, but there's always been exceptions where, like, people have, like, at 30 years old have competed in, like, tennis championships or sport championships, or even just, like, Rubik's Cube stuff, or I don't know, anything, everything that, someone can learn. But it's always interesting how, like, when it's a kid, it's so easy, because you just essentially get taught what your parents want you to learn. Like, you can take dance lessons, you can take chess lessons, you can take guitar lessons. And that stuff kind of gets ingrained in your head. As long as you keep up with it, or your parents, were good about, like, keeping up with things, you can get to where it's, like, your main skill in your life. And you don't really ever have to think about it again. It's almost like it just gets ingrained in your head. But like when you're an adult and you try and do something, I mean, it's not to say you can't get good, but I guess it's a little bit more difficult. You're thinking too much sometimes. Sometimes instead of just doing something, you're thinking too much about it. Sometimes that I've noticed that's always been my problem sometimes, is that I start thinking too much about, oh, maybe I'm not doing this the right way. What if I'm not, coloring it this way? Or what if I'm not, like, hitting it the right way? Eventually, you kind of just mute that, and you can start doing something. Instead of just doing it over and over and over. You're, repeating. Repetition has always been, how you get good at something for the most part. But you keep repeating it, and you keep repeating it, and you could be repeating it wrong until someone corrects you. But if you're sitting there thinking, well, what if I learn it wrong? What if I learn it, not the way I'm supposed to learn it? but you spend that whole time wasting actually learning something. Even if it is wrong, you're still learning something versus not doing anything at all because you're scared that you're going to learn it wrong. That's kind of, the trade-off. And I think as a kid, you have an intense focus. You can just focus on things and not worry, oh, well, what if this happens? What if this happens? What if I can't do this? What if this, versus someone who's older, you start, worrying about all this shit. But yeah, that's kind of what I wanted to talk about this week. I don't know how short this was. I tried to come up with some stuff. But like I said, I'm just trying this out. I hope that I can keep coming up with topics, and I hope that I can keep, talking to you guys. Whoever's listening, feel free to send me feedback. Like I said, email me at topictantrum@gmail.com. I'm still trying to get this put up on iTunes. So if you're listening to this, I don't know how. It's probably through Podbean, which is how I host it. But I've been trying to do a little bit of artwork, and I kind of want an intro music, but I'm trying to find maybe royalty-free music. Those are the two things that I'm working on. I'm trying to cut a little podcast square artwork thing so it kind of shows it on iTunes. But for right now, it's probably going to be pretty bare in terms of I'm literally probably going to just put the words on a little graphic. And then on top of that, I would like some intro music because I feel like sometimes, it's just weird just going straight into talking. But thank you again for tuning in to Topic Tantrum. Let me know what you think until next week or until whenever I decide to put one up. Thank you so much for listening, and I will see you guys soon.